1876, Baden Powell joined the 13th Hussars in India with the rank of lieutenant. He enhanced and honed his military scouting skills amidst the Zulu in the early 1880s in the natal province of South Africa, where his regiment had been posted, and where he was mentioned in dispatches. Baden Powell's skills impressed his superiors, and in 1890 he was brevetted major as military secretary and senior aide-de-camp to the commander-in-chief and governor of Malta, his uncle General Sir Henry Augustus Smith. 14 He was posted to Malta for 3 years, also working as intelligence officer for the Mediterranean for the Director of Military Intelligence. 14 He frequently traveled disguised as a butterfly collector, incorporating plans of military installations into his drawings of butterfly wings. 21 In 1884 he published Reconnaissance and Scouting. 22 Baden Powell returned to Africa in 1896, and served in the Second Matabele War, in the expedition to relieve British South Africa Company personnel under siege in Bulawayo. 23 This was a formative experience for him, not only because he commanded reconnaissance missions into enemy territory in the Matapo Hills, but because many of his later Boy Scout ideas took hold here. 24 It was during this campaign that he first met and befriended the American scout Frederick Russell Burnham, who introduced Baden Powell to stories of the American Old West and woodcraft, i.e., scoutcraft, and here that he was introduced for the first time to the Montana Peak version of a Western cowboy hat, of which Stetson was a prolific manufacturer, and which also came to be known as a campaign hat in the many versatile and practical uses of a neckerchief. 14 Baden Powell was accused of illegally executing a prisoner of war in 1896, the Matabele chief Uwini, who had been promised his life would be spared if he surrendered. 25 Uwini was sentenced to be shot by firing squad by a military court, a sentence Baden Powell confirmed. Baden Powell was cleared by a military court of inquiry, but the colonial civil authorities wanted a civil investigation and trial. Baden Powell later claimed he was released without a stain on my character. 26 After Rhodesia, Baden Powell served in the Fourth Ashanti War in Gold Coast. In 1897, at the age of 40, he was brevetted colonel, the youngest colonel in the British Army, and given command of the 5th Dragoon Guards in India. 27 A few years later he wrote a small manual, entitled Aids to Scouting, a summary of lectures he had given on the subject of military scouting, much of it a written explanation of the lessons he had learned from Burnham, to help train recruits. 28 Baden Powell returned to South Africa before the Second Boer War and was engaged in further military actions against the Zulus. Although instructed to maintain a mobile mounted force on the frontier with the Boer republics, Baden Powell amassed stores and established a garrison at Mafeking. The subsequent siege of Mafeking lasted 217 days. Although Baden Powell could have destroyed his stores and had sufficient forces to break out throughout much of the siege, especially since the Boers lacked adequate artillery to shell the town or its forces, he remained in the town to the point of his intended mounted soldiers eating their horses. The town had been surrounded by a Boer army, at times in excess of 8,000 men. 29 The siege of the small town received much attention from both the Boers and international media because Lord Edward Cecil, the son of the British Prime Minister, was besieged in the town. 30-31 The garrison held out until relieved, in part thanks to cunning deceptions, many devised by Baden Powell. Fake minefields were planted and his soldiers pretended to avoid non-existent barbed wire while moving between trenches. 32 Baden Powell did much reconnaissance work himself. 33 In one instance, noting that the Boers had not removed the rail line, Baden Powell loaded an armored locomotive with sharpshooters and sent it down the rails into the heart of the Boer encampment and back again in a successful attack. 31 A contrary view expressed by historian Thomas Pakenham of Baden Powell's actions during the siege argues that his success in resisting the Boers was secured at the expense of the lives of the native African soldiers and civilians, including members of his own African garrison. Pakenham stated that Baden Powell drastically reduced the rations to the native garrison. 34 However, in 2001, after subsequent research, Pakenham changed this view. 1430 During the siege, the Mafeking Cadet Corps of white boys below fighting age stood guard, carried messages, assisted in hospitals and so on, freeing grown men to fight. Baden Powell did not form the Cadet Corps himself, and there is no evidence that he took much notice of them during the siege. However, he was sufficiently impressed with both their courage and the equanimity with which they performed their tasks to use them later as an object lesson in the first chapter of Scouting for Boys. 35 The siege was lifted on May 17, 1900. 36 Baden Powell was promoted to Major General and became a national hero. 37 However, British military commanders were more critical of his performance and even less impressed with his subsequent choices to again allow himself to be besieged. 31-34 Ultimately, his failure to properly understand the situation and abandonment of the soldiers, mostly Australians and Rhodesians, at the Battle of Eland's River led to his being removed from action. 30-31 Briefly back in the United Kingdom in October 1901, Baden Powell was invited to visit King Edward VII at Balmoral, the monarch's Scottish retreat, and personally invested as Companion of the Order of the Bath C.B. 38 The South African War had seen the largest British army ever to leave Britain, and with the end of that war on May 31, 1902 active service effectively ceased. Baden Powell was given the role of organizing the South African Constabulary, a colonial police force. 31 But during this phase, Baden Powell was sent to Britain on sick leave, so he was only in command for 7 months. 31 He returned to England to take up a post as Inspector General of Cavalry in 1903. While holding this position, Baden Powell was instrumental in reforming reconnaissance training in British cavalry, giving the force an important advantage in scouting ability over continental rivals. 39 Also during this appointment, Baden Powell selected the location of Catterick Garrison to replace Richmond Castle, which was then the headquarters of the Northumbrian Division. In 1907 he was promoted to Lieutenant General but was left on the inactive list. Eventually, he was appointed to the lowly command of the Northumbrian Division of the newly formed Territorial Force. 40 The Foreign Intelligence section in the Belfast Newsletter reported that when he visited Santiago de Chile for 3 days, he was given a warmer reception than had ever been afforded a foreigner in South America. 41 In 1910, after being rebuked for a series of what were regarded as publicity gaffes, one suggesting invasion by Germany, Baden Powell retired from the army. 14 Baden Powell later claimed he was advised by King Edward VII that he could better serve his country by promoting scouting. 42-43 On the outbreak of World War I in 1914, at the age of 57, Baden Powell put himself at the disposal of the War Office. No command was given to him. Lord Kitchener said, he could lay his hand on several competent divisional generals but could find no one who could carry on the invaluable work of the Boy Scouts. 44 Invaluable work of the Boy Scouts. Lieutenant General Robert Stevenson Smith Baden Powell, 1st Baron Baden Powell, OM, GCMG, GCVO, KCB, KSTJ, DL Baden Powell Baden Powell 4 February 22, 1857 January 8, 1941 was a British Army officer, writer, founder and first Chief Scout of the Worldwide Scout Movement, and founder, with his sister Agnes, of the Worldwide Girl Guide Girl Scout Movement. Baden Powell authored the first editions of the seminal work Scouting for Boys, which was an inspiration for the Scout movement. 5 Educated at Charterhouse School, Baden Powell served in the British Army from 1876 until 1910 in India and Africa. 6 In 1899, during the Second Boer War in South Africa, Baden Powell successfully defended the town in the Siege of Mafeking. 7 Several of his books, written for military reconnaissance and scout training in his African years, were also read by boys. In August 1907, he held a demonstration camp, the Brownsea Island Scout Camp, which is now seen as the beginning of scouting. 8 Based on his earlier books, particularly Aids to Scouting, he wrote Scouting for Boys. 9 Published in 1908 by Sir Arthur Pearson, for boy readership. In 1910 Baden Powell retired from the Army and formed the Scout Association. The first Scout rally was held at the Crystal Palace in 1909. Girls in Scout uniform attended, telling Baden Powell that they were the Girl Scouts. In 1910, Baden Powell and his sister Agnes Baden Powell started the Girl Guide and Girl Scout organization. In 1912 he married Olave St. Clair Soames. He gave guidance to the Scout and Girl Guide movements until retiring in 1937. Baden Powell lived his last years in Nairobi, Kenya, where he died and was buried in 1941. His grave is a national monument. 10 Baden Powell was a son of the Reverend Professor Baden Powell, civilian professor of geometry at Oxford University and Church of England priest, and his third wife, Henrietta Grace Smith, eldest daughter of Admiral William Henry Smith. After the Reverend Professor Powell died in 1860, his widow, to identify her children with her late husband's fame, and to set her own children apart from their half-siblings and cousins, styled the family name Baden Powell. The name was eventually legally changed by royal license on April 30, 1902. 11 The family of Baden Powell's father originated in Suffolk. 12. His mother's earliest known Smith ancestor was the Royalist American colonist. Her mother's father Thomas Warrington was the British consul in Naples around 1800. 13. Baden Powell was born as Robert Stevenson Smith Powell at 6 Stanhope Street, now 11 Stanhope Terrace, Paddington, London, on February 22, 1857. He was called Steffi, pronounced Stevie, by his family. 14. He was named after his godfather, Robert Stevenson, the railway and civil engineer. 15. And his third name was his mother's surname. 16. Baden Powell had 4 older half-siblings from the second of his father's 2 previous marriages, and was the 6th child of his father's 3rd marriage. 17. Warrington 1847, 1921 George 1847, 1898 Augustus Gus 1849, 1863, who was often ill and died young. Francis Frank 1850, 1933 Henrietta Smith, October 28, 1851 March 9, 1854 John Penrose Smith, December 21, 1852 December 14, 1855 Jesse Smith November 25, 1855 July 24, 1856 BP February 22, 1857 January 8, 1941 Agnes 1858, 1945 Baden 1860, 1937 The 3 children immediately preceding BP et al. Died very young before he was born. 14. Baden Powell's father died when he was 3. Subsequently, Baden Powell was raised by his mother, a strong woman who was determined that her children would succeed. In 1933 he said of her, "The whole secret of my getting on lay with my mother." 14. 1819 he attended Rose Hill School, Tunbridge Wells, and was given a scholarship to Charterhouse, a prestigious public school named after the ancient Carthusian monastery buildings it occupied in the city of London. 20. However, while he was a pupil there, the school moved out to new purpose-built premises in the countryside near Godalming in Surrey. He played the piano and violin, was an ambidextrous artist, and enjoyed acting. Holidays were spent on yachting or canoeing expeditions with his brothers. Baden Powell's first introduction to scouting skills was through stalking and cooking game while avoiding teachers in the nearby woods, which were strictly out of bounds. 14. Which